varsity football team. Senior year, first scrimmage, and that had to happen to me. It was August 5th, and I went onto the football field having absolutely no idea that that would be the last time I stepped on it. But I was playing defensive end, and I had a helmet-to-helmet hit. So as soon as he hits me right here, my head jerks. I fall flat on my back, and then my head snaps back again and hits the ground. And
Teresa.
Yes.
We need Teresa Horton in the office. Quickly.
Whenever I got hit, I ended up playing for 5 more plays. So it wasn't even sudden, but all of a sudden my arms started going numb, and I was losing my coordination. I was stumbling around. That's actually when I came off the field, because I couldn't hardly even stand up straight. So I took myself out of the game. I looked over at a friend of mine. I said, I got to get out and get somebody else to come play for me. Went over to the sideline, took a knee, and that's when my speech started getting slurred. So these are all just little things that you can kind of look at your athletes and everything to kind of tell. And it basically sounded like I was completely drunk. So I had to stay on a knee, waving my hand out in front of me, trying to get somebody's attention when they walked by so that they could go get the athletic trainer. As soon as they came over to me, they tried to help me up, and as soon as they did, I blacked out. And that was on Friday, and the next thing I know, I'm waking up on Sunday. So that's a little bit different. But what was going on, or so I've been told, because I was unconscious, the athletic trainer took me over and he was checking my signs. He was shining the light in my eyes, checking all my reflexes, and I was completely out of it. Like, I was non-responsive at all. So they put the AED on me, had a low pulse rate, and I had no external bleeding. But they ended up finding out that, he said, hey, this definitely isn't just a concussion. We need to send him to somewhere that treats head trauma. So with him being there and being able to say that, I know coaches are trained for some concussion symptoms, but I feel like a little bit more, if you know a little bit more about the situation, then you'll know what to do with a player. And so they sent me to the hospital, and I had bleeding on the brain right over here, and now I actually have metal plates in my head keeping that there. And so when I woke up on Sunday, they asked me, did I know what happened? And I said, I was playing football, but I'm not exactly sure now. They said, well, you're in the ICU, it's Sunday, and I was like, okay. So what happened to Saturday? Well, we had you under sedation. We had to go in and drain all the blood from your head that was on it before, and you're really lucky to even be here. Because without having somebody who was there to be aware of what can happen to the athlete when they do have that kind of situation, then I wouldn't have been here. Because people need to be more aware about what can happen so that they end up not losing their athlete like I almost lost my life. So basically, it was because of having somebody there that was more aware, willing to take over the situation and say, okay, we're going to look out for the best interest in the athlete as possible. Because when you look at people like this, and I'm not saying that y'all do, it's just sometimes people say, hey, you're an athlete, we need to win the game, get back out there. And I'll admit, I'm guilty of it too. I'll look at a guy and I go like, oh, I need to come out of the game, I'm not feeling good. And then it's like, dude, just get back out there. You kidding me? But you got to shake that off. After this happened to me, that's the last thing on my mind, is telling people you need to get back out there. You have to look at the best interest of the athlete and not look at them as an athlete. You need to look at them as a student, someone's kid, just as a person who needs to live their own life. And if you continue with letting somebody play that has a concussion, mine was much more severe than that, but it can only get worse from there. If they have a concussion and they get hit in the head again, then it can be just as bad, if not worse, than what mine was. So just looking out for that different kind of stuff. Like I said, things that you can look for on the field. There's actually different kinds of concussions, and what other people think is concussions are just, you know, bump on the head, it'll be fine, but they're actually a brain injury. And the different kind of concussions, they can be, you know, your arms go numb, or you can lose coordination. It can actually even just make them nauseated, and that's even a concussion symptom, and that being the only one. So just look for those kind of things, and as soon as you see it, you need to find out what you can do or how bad off the player really is. If they have these symptoms and they say, no, I'm okay, but you can tell there's something more wrong, then take them out of the game. I mean, you know, having something wrong with the kid for a lifetime isn't going to be nearly as bad as losing that one game, because it may be your star player. And, you know, that's just certain things you have to look at. Because, like, coach, my arms are feeling kind of numb. Go out. It ain't worth losing, you know, it can actually make you lose feeling in certain parts of your body. They told me that they were amazed I'm even here being able to speak, and they said I would have had stroke-like symptoms that I possibly wouldn't even be able to feel anything on my left side. They told me I probably wouldn't be able to remember my own parents' names, but I did. And it's just a blessing in itself, but not everybody can be as lucky as I was. So that's the biggest thing that we need to look for, is being aware and that kind of thing, so they don't, you know, you want the ladder for them, you don't want them to, something really bad to happen in the progress of it. Because if they go back out there, like I said, and they're already hurting, then it can't get any better. It's not going to stay the same. It's not going to get better. It can only go down. And again, that can cause long-term effects for them. Different things, it can even affect them in school. Like short-term memory is really affected by it. Again, mine was much more severe, but I had a friend of mine who's kind of in the same position I'm in right now. He would start taking notes in class that morning, and by lunchtime I asked him a question about, hey, like, what was the homework, or what did the teacher say about this, that, and the other? He goes like, I didn't even know we were talking about that. And he wouldn't remember what we were talking about until the next day. And then it would just come back to him. And that's the kind of things that teachers need to be aware of. Learning can be affected with short term. If you notice that an athlete did have a head injury and you're noticing that their grades are slipping and something's not going on to where they're not getting all of their notes and that kind of thing, then just look for that. Say, okay, well, what happened to you? Do you play a sport? And they say, yeah, and then you go like, okay, well, did you have a head injury? And yeah, I got hit in the head the other day. We'll send them to the nurse or the doctor or something, because more than likely, that's what it's affecting, is because of their short term. And I still have that problem today. I used to be able to, and this may not make the teachers in here very happy, but I used to study like 10 minutes before a test, and I could remember it enough to where I could make a 95 or 100 on it, no problem. Now I have to study 2 or 3 days in advance and then keep studying over and over again. That way I can just remember those notes that I used to be able to get like that. So if you're noticing that their memory's getting affected, they're not able to pay attention in class as much as possible, which I can't really say anything. I have ADD, so it's already hard enough for me. But just small things like that that y'all can see in a classroom, speak up and say, okay, well, if you had a head injury, then just go to the nurse and see if it's a concussion or not. Again, it only gets worse. It can't get better until you start treating it. That way it can get better. They need rest. They need to do anything they possibly can just to get better. And it's just, like I said before, we have to see these athletes as not the star of the game, not somebody that we need to finish it out. We've got to realize that they have a future to live and that they have to fulfill what they want to do in the future. And if we let them play and they possibly have, like what could have happened to me, stroke-like symptoms or learning disabilities, because we just didn't notice anything and we just let them go back out there and play, then we're not fulfilling their future. We're only letting them live for today when we need to be thinking about the future. So just make sure that y'all keep that in mind. Always be aware of the situation. And not everybody is as lucky as I was to have my athletic trainer. But as far as coaches go, y'all can still be trained and even go to some of these seminars that we do for athletic trainers and sit in and notice some of the things that you can tell that's wrong with a student. So do that if you can. Any chance that somebody asks you, hey, coach, do you want to go to the seminar with us to check out stuff on concussions? Do it. That way you can catch it early and not have any lasting effects to them. So just make sure that you're thinking about them for the future and not for today. Thank you.
The reason all I've got here is our principal fell a while ago, so I had to go check him out for concussion, so I sent Barry to go do it.
Can you get the light? Brennen's story is great. As an athletic trainer, his injury is one of my worst fears. My second one is what we're about to watch. Up.
Sportstown, USA. Greenville, North Carolina. It's a small town with a big passion for sports. These are the 4-time high school state champions, the Rampants of J.H. Rose. They know what it's like to win.
Coming out here watching them play, when I was young, I had to play for the team.
They know what it takes to win.
You want to be known as the best, strongest, toughest, survival of the fittest.
They also know the painful price of trying to win.
It's an inherently dangerous sport. I mean, when football first started, they tried to outlaw it.
But no one could have imagined what would happen to these champions in 2008.
To me, that was a perfect storm. You wouldn't know how many times I thought about me doing something different. I can't have you coming outside. It over there.
It was Todd Blythe's first year as head coach at J.H. Rose High School. Football was always his dream.
Ever since third grade, I've always been involved in football, either playing it or coaching it.
16-year-old junior Jaquan Waller was Coach Life's star running back.
He was very athletic. He was quick, great smile, good attitude.
Amazing football player. Fastest guy on the field.
Zach Rogers was a teammate and a friend. He was there when it all began.
He came through, our middle linebacker hit him straight on.
Did you think that was a hard hit?
We all said, ooh, that was a good hit. You could just tell he was shaking cobwebs out of his head. Just one of those plays where you know he got his bell rung. Coaches came over and looked at him, and they carried him off the field to get checked and make sure everything was all right.
Our trainer at the time, he wasn't even on location for some of those practices because of other obligations with other fall sports.
Not having an athletic trainer there is not unusual. Fewer than half of high schools in the United States have a certified athletic trainer on the field. Many, like Rose, actually have first responders who are trained in first aid only. Not a certified athletic trainer educated in recognizing head trauma. And that is in part why things started to go critically wrong. Despite having headaches and balance problems, the responder, who eventually arrived on scene, told Jaquan's mother that he might have a migraine and sent him home. No mandatory visit to a doctor. No rules for what needed to happen before he got back on the field. No one knew any better then.
He complained of a headache after that.
Jaquan's older brother, Marquise, remembers.
It doesn't sound like people are too worried about it.
I mean, it happens. I mean, you're in practice and you get a date and think he'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty much it.
Jaquan showed up for practice the next day, gearing up for Friday night's game against rival Harvard High School.
That day he was fine, cracking jokes as normal.
Did you want to get back to play?
Oh yeah.
Did anyone say to him, look, too early, shouldn't be playing yet? Think about that hit you just took.
No, because everybody just thought he just got his bell wrong. I mean, nothing out of normal. It's just how you play. You play hurt when you have to.
Friday night, September 19th, 48 hours after the concussive blow to the head, Jaquan was back on the field without being cleared by a doctor. It was the second quarter, and a hit occurred that few noticed.
It wasn't even a hit that he should have been breathing hard or coming off saying his head hurt. And Jaquan just started like tapping the coach, and then he started gripping, and then he fell, and he was pretty bad.
What did he look like?
He was kind of foaming at the mouth a little bit, and you could tell he wasn't there.
This time, the trainer was there, but the ambulance wasn't. Many estimate it was about 10 minutes before EMS arrived on the scene.
We're going to try to keep it as still as possible. That's a little scary.
And by then, Jaquan was unconscious.
I got to give you the medication.
My mother had called me, and she's crying and stuff. You know, something's wrong with him. They're putting the oxygen on him.
The ambulance rushed to nearby Pitt County Memorial Hospital, arriving about 20 minutes after the hit.
When Jaquan hit the doors, young man, critically injured, not breathing, still in his football uniform, you could cut the quiet and tension with a knife.
So he was brought right here.
Right here to 58.
Dr. Scott Segraves was the trauma doctor who treated Jaquan.
I pretty much knew that this was a fatal event, and then it was confirmed once we saw the CAT scan.
All was white next to the bone is the blood.
What you're looking at is Jaquan's subdural hematoma, and also the swelling in the brain that was so intense, so significant, it was not survivable. Within an hour and a half of him being injured, Jaquan was essentially brain dead. kept alive only by life support.
Oh man, he's laid on the bed and his head is swollen. He's not moving, he's not talking. He needs help breathing from this, this respirator. I just lost him.
10:50 a.m. Less than 72 hours after his first concussion, 16-year-old Jaquan Waller died.
Unfortunately, that happens dozens of times a year in the United States. So get the lights for me. Again, my name is Chris Greenleaf. Just to kind of add to the little bit so you can get some of my credibility, I'm the former director of athletic training for the Moore Orthopedic Clinic. I help with Julie found the Concussion Center at Moore Clinic. My current posting is I'm the Associate Athletic Director for Sports Medicine and Adjunct Professor at Newberry College. Head injury is something Julie and I have studied. That's been our focus of study for a number of years now, correct, Julie? And are very fortunate we represent one of the only concussion centers in the state of South Carolina, where we work with 2 physicians that are trained in concussion management techniques and head trauma. So what we're here to talk to you today about is concussion management for coaches and teachers. And give me a second, I'm going to pull up my slides so I'm not constantly looking at the board. I am a little bit blind. So we're going to keep going from that. Today we're going to talk about some definitions, some concussion definitions. What is it? What are the symptoms? What is concussion management? We're going to define what that is. What post-concussive syndrome is, and that's exactly what Mr. Waller here suffered from. Post-concussive or secondary impact syndrome. What are the current return to play recommendations? And we're going to talk about academic accommodations. And one of the things that for the last 18 months that me and this young lady right here have done is we've gone all over the state and with schools that we work with in the Midlands area is actually put in accommodation programs at high schools for concussions and for head trauma. So next slide. Concussion definition. Concussion is a type of brain injury that changes the way the brain normally functions. It can be caused by a bump, a blow, a jolt to the head or to the body. I'll give you a great example. About 3 weeks ago at Newberry, I had a lacrosse athlete, one of my keepers. She didn't get hit in the head. She got hit in the throat with a ball. And she suffered a concussion. She got cleared yesterday. She had concussive symptoms for 3 weeks because of it. Academic accommodations had to be made because of it. Concussions occur from a fall blow to the body that causes the head and brain to move rapidly back and forth. School nurses will know this term, countercoup. It's called countercoup concussion. It's basically where your brain sits in your skull, suspended in fluid by the brainstem. And if you're hit, the brain can jostle inside the skull and it can actually smack up against the inside of the cranium, okay, and cause injury. That actually is the most common way concussions happen. Is through secondary blows inside the cranium. Even what seems to be a mild bump to the head can be serious. Another example, I'm going to use another one of my athletes that I'm currently dealing with right now. A football player, my nose guard at Newberry, we were in a thud practice. We weren't even going hard. He took a grazing blow. He was just his uppers in his helmet. He just took a grazing blow on contact, just to the side of his head. Didn't think anything of it. This was the end of the week, toward last week. Came in on Monday and said, "Coach, I've had a headache for 4 days." He goes, "I can't shake it. Just can't shake it." Short-term memory was okay. We did the check. Just seemed to be just headache. So we did our due diligence. We ran past the GPs first. We did all these other things to rule out sinus problems. Those. That all came back fine. Came in the next day, coach, my eyes, he goes, I can't, light's starting to bother me now. This kid had no short-term memory problems, nothing, okay? We actually, we'll show you the battery that we use. His concussion test scores were actually fairly high, which means high is good, low is bad. We're fairly high, so it was okay. So this is a very gray area. But he didn't take a hit like this young man did. He took a grazing blow. He does have a concussion. We were finally diagnosed with that. We got him down to the specialist. But doesn't have it. We don't think he's going to have any long-term effects from this. But that's just an example of a grazing incident that can happen. 80 to 90% of concussions are short-lived, 7 to 10 days. So the majority clear within 2 weeks. 5 to 10% have prolonged symptoms, 4 to 6, and may progress to post-concussive syndrome. This is the scale that I use with my parents, okay? 80% of concussions you're going to clear within 2 weeks. 10% is going to take 4 to 6 weeks. But then you have that 10% that are going to take 6 weeks and beyond. Julie and I have had cases. I'll give you another example of an athlete that we started with in high school, and this young lady is now a sophomore at University of South Carolina, Macon. She had concussive and post-concussive syndrome for 22 months that affected her academic performance for the first 2 years of her college career. I had a high school kid that I dealt with that he had 5 concussive episodes through middle school, his last year of middle school. We caught him in high school. 5 concussive events in 20 months. He has severe psychological disorder now because of it. Again, examples of kids that take beyond 6 weeks. Concussions aren't cut and dry anymore. We used to grade them. 1, 2, 3. Those are gone. We don't do that anymore. There's no such thing. It's a concussion, or it's not a concussion, and it's based on symptomology now. It's not based on time frame. They clear when they clear. That's just the long and short of it, and we'll get to why here in a second. American football, 10% of all college and 20% of all high school players suffer concussion each year. It's pretty high. It's pretty high. They're students in classroom. That's the most important thing to remember, that they're students in your classroom. And we'll get to that in a minute. Males greater than females, 2 to 2.8%. Males to 1 female, so it's a 2-to-1 ratio, boys to girls. And some of the reasons we think is that boys participate in more collision and contact sports than girls. They represent 9% of all injuries in high school. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when you get into the 10% range of all injuries in high school that have to do with head trauma, that becomes a significant number when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of incidents a year in the United States alone, not worldwide, just in the U.S. High school football players experience approximately 3,000 hits per season, with some generating forces in excess of 100 Gs. This is I love this example. Okay? A fighter pilot. They wear pressure suits in the cockpit. You black out at 7 Gs in a cockpit. Some of these kids are taking, 9 times that force intracranially. So, kind of the disparity that I tell people is, think about this. Fighter pilot's locked in a seat with a helmet, with a mask, with a pressure suit. He's pretty much in a bubble, in control, and you're worried about his well-being and blacking out all the time. We are very, very cavalier with the kids who experience hits this high. It's kind of a sobering fact. Okay, signs and symptoms. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of it. Appears dazed or stunned. They're confused about events. They answer questions slowly than normal. Some kids are just slow, but slower than normal. Slow may be normal for some kids, but I'm talking about excessively slow. Then we'll repeat questions. So, are you okay? Coach, did you just ask, am I okay? Or you're late for class, where have you been? Did you just ask me where I've been? Those are some of the classic responses that I've gotten over the last few years from kids, just because I'm more aware of it. They can't recall events prior to the hit, bump, or fall. They know they got hit, but they don't know anything that happened before it. They can't recall anything after. And they may have one or the other. They may not have either of it. They may remember everything. My football player remembers everything. He remembers being in class that day. He remembers what he ate for lunch that day. He remembers everything that happened over the weekend, but still he had concussive pieces. Losses of consciousness, even briefly, that can be transient. And I'm talking less than 10 seconds. If a kid is dazed and he just kind of loses it for a second, that is transient loss of consciousness, as we define it now. Less than 10 seconds can show significant trauma pieces with a head injury. This is the one that gets scary. This is when we get into post-concussive syndrome. Shows behavioral and personality changes. This is when you, and everybody's got it in their classroom, you just got that good kid. You just got that good kid. Great student, great personality, is happy, well-adjusted, no problems with parents, you know, for the most part, and it's like somebody flips the switch. This kid becomes Mr. Hyde overnight. They become disruptive in class. They ignore class completely and just sit there and are quiet. Their grades are affected, or they become aggressive. That's the one that scares me the most. Is you have that great kid, and then all of a sudden, he's snapping at his classmates. He's talking back to teachers and coaches, and it starts to add up after a while. But that is a huge telltale sign for classroom teachers, is their personalities shift. I don't want to say completely change, but they'll shift. It may be subtle. And then all of a sudden they forget their schedule, they're starting to get late for class, or they may start missing assignments, not turning in homework. So it's not going to be one thing singularly, it's going to be a bunch of things together. So if you start seeing a lot of these things together, you start asking the question, hey, you okay? Did something happen at practice? You know, some athletes that we see now play like club soccer and recreational soccer and stuff outside of the school. So that's when we have to be aware, and we ask them, did something happen? You know, you're playing soccer, we know that, or you're playing for middle school kids, Dixie baseball, stuff like that. So did something happen after school? And then the pieces start kind of fitting together. Oh, sorry. Signs of symptom report about it. These are things that they're going to start complaining about, and they will start complaining about it. I feel foggy-headed. I can't. Miss Smith, I don't feel like I'm thinking straight. They don't start thinking clearly anymore. They have difficulty concentrating and remembering. The normal student that could study 10 minutes before a test may study 10 minutes before a test and can't remember what happened 10 minutes later. Or that kid that never has to write anything down with school assignments starts missing homework. Very subtle. They'll feel like they're slow. I've had even kids tell me, Coach, it kind of feels like I'm in maple syrup. I can't move right. My head doesn't feel, it feels stiff in my neck. They just feel slow. Sluggish, they feel hazy. The biggest thing we hear on field is, I just feel like I'm in a fog. I feel like I'm in a cloud. Like everything's just closing in. Those are some of the catchphrases that we hear on some of these symptoms for thought and brain function. You know, the physical stuff, they'll complain of headache. And it may not be the bounding, you know, frontal or cranial head pain that we associate with headache. It may feel like pressure. They may come to you and say, my eyes are going to pop out of my head. or I feel like my ears have to pop. There's just pressure in the back of my head. Nausea, vomiting, balance problems, and they can be subtle. The kid can look like he's walking normally, but he may step sideways instead of walking in a straight line. So one thing as athletic trainers that we look at, even when they're walking away from us, is we look at their gait patterns. When they walk toward us, even every time now, I'm kind of cued in on this. If a kid comes to me off the field, I'm looking the way he's walking up to me. Is he doing this? You know, type thing. Is he dragging his toes? That can be for other reasons, but I'm looking for those patterns. Fatigue, feeling tired. I've had kids come in with a little bit of pressure in the head, but they're like, Coach, I'm sleeping 10 hours a day. I can't sleep enough. I'm going home, and usually I can go all afternoon. I need to take a nap now. Now because I'm cued into it, it's little red flags. Ding, 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 ding. Something's going on. Blurry or double vision. You've got to be kind of wary that if the kids are wearing glasses or not. That can be kind of a misnomer, but that is a symptom. Sensitivity to light and noise. Kids that usually could be in a gymnasium with noise going crazy. They may be in a classroom now, and the sound of your voice doing a lecture will drive them absolutely bats. It'll be like fingernails on a chalkboard. And they'll sit there, and you'll see them in the classroom, because I've had it happen. They'll be in the classroom, and they're kind of they're protecting their core. They're kind of sitting there with their hands in their lap, and you may see them wince or kind of do one of these things because the noise is bothering them so much. Or the football player that's got his hat down like this, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, now I'm with college students, so that's for another reason most of the time. But those are cues. Those are little things you got to start looking for in a classroom. In a high school classroom, there's no excuse for that. I mean, hats are not allowed sometimes, and they're going to be insistent they got a head down or they've got glasses on, or all of a sudden they'll go to Coach Alex and say, "Hey, Coach, I need a visor. I need a visor in my helmet because I can't stand it. I can't stand the glare." And then we get into numbness and tingling. They may have some transient stuff in their arms and legs, or just the overall. They'll just may come to you and say, "I don't feel right. I just don't feel normal. Something's wrong." We know we've all had kids that kind of say that all the time, so we have to kind of know our kids. But again, it's something that I've learned in the last few years. If something's wrong and they don't feel okay and they have the courage to come and say that something's not right, something's wrong. So we kind of need to cue in on it now. Look for these other things. And maybe some of these other things don't exist. But what if they do? So now we as professionals, as educators, athletic trainers, coaches, nurses, we got to have to do a little bit of investigative work now to make sure that these kids are solid and whole. These are some other things. More in girls than boys. Boys will have emotional changes like irritability and aggression. Girls will have more sadness, depression, nervousness. Boys tend to lash out in emotional states with head trauma. Girls tend to keep it in. That protection type thing. They're nervous, they internalize, and it's the difference between boys and girls. Now, I have seen boys flip the switch and do the other stuff too. But these are the emotional. Now, sleep. They'll be drowsy all the time. They may sleep more than usual. They may sleep less. Coach, I can't sleep. Had one case about 1.5 years ago where I literally had kids say, I could sleep about 1.5 hours and then I'm up. And he was like he was hardwired. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't settle his head. His head hurt too bad. He couldn't get comfortable, so he couldn't sleep. Or they'll have trouble falling asleep, period. They're restless. They can't move. My head hurts. My eyes hurt. I can't, it's almost like they're whining. and they'll do it to their parents a whole lot. And you know, I've gotten some reports secondarily from parents that they're, you know, we'll give them medication and they'll whine. We just don't know what's going on. So those are now symptomologies that we put together with the rest of the stuff. Okay. Now, concussion management has changed huge. Okay, and I'm going to tell you as a practitioner. Okay, it's kind of like the whole thing. You know, I'm also a client. Is that not only do I teach in the classroom, but now and do administrative work, I still practice. So one of the things that we do immediately, I have anybody reporting any symptomology at all for head trauma or concussion, I remove them from play. That day, they're done. No questions asked. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You're finished. Sit right here, smile at me for the rest of practice. We're watching. One thing that I've gotten into the habit is taking their keys. I don't let them drive. But in some of the high school kids I've gotten complaints, but my mom is still at work or my dad's still at work. Tough tickets. They're going to have to get off work and come get you. Okay? Because you're not driving, because I'm not allowing you to get behind the wheel. A good friend of mine is actually with State Law Enforcement Division, and I asked him that question. Kids that are driving with head injury, what's your take on it? He goes, Chris, this is the ruling in the eyes of the law. Impairment is impairment. It doesn't matter if it's alcohol or they have a head injury. If it's something that's going to affect their reaction time and their ability to make decisions, in the eyes of the law, if they get into an accident or they have a violation, you know, while behind the wheel of a car, it's the same. They're driving impaired. So you can be charged. Doesn't matter. They can be charged. So it's very important, again, as professionals, that we are aware of this and take those keys. Okay? No practices, gym class, or restricted physical activity. Kids who are suffering concussion, physical activity exacerbates symptoms. Nothing. Our doctors shut kids down. They shut them down. We'll get into why here in a few minutes. Okay? We limit screen time. Think about it. Stimulus through computers, cell phones, television. Okay? That is visual stimulus to the brain. It's constant. So the first thing we tell parents is take away your phones. No television or limited television. We limit studying on computers to less than 20 minutes at a time to limit the stimulus to the brain. The brain has to rest. The only way your body heals is when you're at rest. It's when you're asleep. You have to rest for your brain to recover. You limit excessive stimulus. Okay? So what we advocate at home is let them be quiet. Put them in quiet environments. Okay? If they have younger siblings, try to let little Johnny go over here in the den and try to keep the other kids over here. Okay? Because stimulus is stimulus. Visual, auditory, physical, it doesn't matter. It's stimulus. Things we've had to get into when it comes to accommodation is consider homeschooling or shortened day in excessive cases. Okay? And we'll talk about more of that with accommodation. School accommodations, communication is key between healthcare professionals, such as yourselves, myself, doctors. Communication is key in doing the proper accommodations for these kids' academic success. So, kind of funny, but that's kind of an old cartoon. That's kind of the old adage is walk it off. The guy holding his head. One of the things in management now is we have to determine the frequency of follow-up and is there an athletic trainer available. Roughly right now, Barry, and you can correct me on this, 52% of the state isn't covered by athletic trainers. So there's some schools that don't have availability. People like Mr. Atkinson here, or myself, or Julie, or Aaron. Thank you, Aaron. So that may fall on you as a school nurse. That we advocate daily check-ins, daily follow-up. Okay. We don't send them home alone. They should be monitored closely over the first few hours, and some which stay with them overnight. Now, one thing that stay with them overnight, but we don't wake them up. We don't wake them up anymore. We let them sleep. Waking a kid up every hour or two disrupts the cycle of sleep, and that can actually be more detrimental than a help. And this is where Julie takes over with this one, and I'll jump in every once in a while.
So this is our management protocol. We've had to change some things because, back in 2008 with the story from CNN, things were different then. We know, that's 4 years ago, and we know more now than we did then. Basically, a lot of this has come out of the third international guidelines on concussion that was done in Zurich back in 2008. We're hoping that they come up with another meeting here soon. But basically what the standard of practice is now is what Chris said. They have a concussive event. We think it's a concussion. They sit. They don't play anymore. They have to be checked by a healthcare provider, and we'll get to the rule change for South Carolina, but they have specified 6 people that can diagnose a concussion. Athletic trainers, an MD, a DO, a paramedic, a nurse practitioner, or a PA. Those are the only 6 people that can say, yes, you have a concussion. Once they have a concussion, we do what is called the SCAT-2. It's a sport concussion assessment tool. It came out with the Zurich guidelines. It's free. You type in SCAT-2 in Google and you will get it. There is also a SCAT-2 app for...
There's an app for that.
Yeah, there's an app for that. For iPads and iPhones, and you can do the SCAT-2 right on and save it and email it to practitioners. It goes through the 22 symptoms of a concussion. It also goes through what we used to use, which is the sideline assessment of concussion. It checks memory, concentration, balance, coordination, and then delayed memory. And it's out of 100, and we go if it's basically about 90 or better, depending on their symptoms. That's kind of our cutoff point. If it's 90 or better, and all they have is a headache, no, I'm probably not automatically going to call it a concussion until 24 hours later. We do that within 3 hours. And for us, because we use neurocognitive testing in our schools, they are in clinic within 48, 72 hours to see the physician to get that neurocognitive testing and to make the school accommodations, because the doctor is the one that has to do that. They get those testing, we'll do another SCAT-2, the doctors do their evaluation. Dr. Burnworth and Dr. Scott pretty much have the same evaluation. They do a few things different, but what they're checking is coordination, balance, range of motion in their extremities, that sort of thing. If they are out of school, we usually do phone check-ins because if they're out of school, we want them at home. We want them resting, but we do need to know where their symptoms are so we can say, okay, yeah, you can probably come back to school, or no, we need to talk to doc about getting more days. Once they are back in school, we are doing daily symptomology checklists. We make them go through every day. They come in and they circle their symptoms because we can't do anything more until they're asymptomatic. Once they achieve that, we will start the return to play. It is 5 days. Once they are asymptomatic, it is 5 days till they are fully back to play. That's what y'all coaches need to understand.
That's with no hiccups in the process.
Yeah, that's with no hiccups in the process. It is 5 days. We do not deviate from that. I know that doesn't make y'all coaches happy, but that is the standard of practice. Once they're asymptomatic, we do very light aerobic activity. Generally, we put them on a bike, treadmill, just something that raises their heart rate for 20 minutes. They're fine that day, nothing comes back. The next day, it's 24 hours. We have to wait 24 hours. We'll do that again, and then we throw in some, sport-specific exercises or lunges or jump rope, just raising their heart rate, making sure that nothing's going to come back. After that, they can do a non-contact practice. Then, at that point, if they've cleared all that, they will go back to our doctors. Our doctors clear them before they go to contact. Once they have that clearance, they can do a contact practice. Everything passes that, then they can do a full contact game. It depends on the sport because some things aren't considered contact, but we do things. As long as everything goes right, it's 5 days. If we get to stage 2 and whatever we've done that day brings their symptoms back, they start over. We have to wait till they're asymptomatic for 24 hours and start again. We've had kids that have done that. They think we're doing great, they get a little bit along, and something triggers it and we start all over.
One thing that you may see that's not there, and you may be a question, what about imaging? What about CT? What about MR? 90% of CAT scans on not ones like this young man,
Yeah.
okay? But 90% of concussions, CTs come back normal.
Yeah. This
Because-
isn't,
Go ahead.
okay, I'm going to say it's not a structural injury. What Brennen had was a structural injury. What happened to Brennen was his artery ruptured. That's why he had the bleed. That is our worst fear, is that the hit is going to cause that, because he's right. He is lucky to be here. If it had taken any longer than it had to get him to a hospital, he might not be here. But it is not a structural injury. A concussion is not that. It disrupts the metabolism in the brain. The brain can't use the glucose, which is what it needs for neurons to function appropriately. And the only way to get that process to normalize is rest. Because every time you watch TV, you're playing on the phone, you stimulate the brain, it has to work, and it doesn't work right now. So yeah, CTs and MRIs are not going to show a concussion.
It's a pathochemical change. It's not a structural change. So CT can be mute. Now MR comes into play later. If these kids aren't clearing after a period of weeks, then what our doctors do is they can order MRI. The most effective MRI, there's not a lot of availability of that in South Carolina. It's called it's MR.
It's a fMRI. It's a functional MRI. They have electrodes on the brain, and they scan the brain while they're doing stuff, so they can see, the areas of the brain that are effective chemically.
2 scanners or 3 scanners in the study?
I only know of Palmetto.
Yeah, Palmetto Health Richland has one, and MUSC has one.
MUSC has.
But, I mean, this is like MR, for you nurses, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. This is like MRI on steroids, okay?
Yeah.
So it's not a basic scanner. So that's why imaging sometimes is mute. You don't usually go to imaging until it is a case where there is severe complications over time. Because that's when you'll start structural changes within the brain, shrinking, expanding, those people, but it takes time because it's lack of metabolism of basic brain chemicals that come into play after a period of time.
There are things where we as clinicians are going to send a kid because we want to make sure it's not Brennen's case. If they start vomiting, that is very serious. Any changes in conscious state, if they're coming in and out, we will send them. Any loss of consciousness that we can verify, they are spine boarded and sent. That is our standard protocol. We can't change that. Parents don't always like us for that, but it's their kid's brain. They want to have one. We can't do brain transplants. So there are cases where certain things are going to trigger. Yeah, we're sending the kid, but most of the time, we tell the parents, look, we're sending him because I want to make sure that nothing is wrong. Most likely, the scan is going to come back normal. So this is the form our doctors use for the learning accommodations. And it all depends on the kid, what they decide, but mainly, these are just general things that we do. We'll take them out of class. They don't do physical activity. We ask for, reducing makeup work or giving them extra time for makeup work, because if it takes 14 days for them to recover from the concussion, they're going to be out half of that. So that's 5 days of school that they've most likely missed that they're going to have to make up the work for. So we ask for, extended time for that. Taking tests in quiet environment, having longer time to take the test. A lot of times, the biggest thing our doctors check for is what they call convergence. So they're looking at, can they look down and then look up without having problems. That's the biggest thing that will take them out of school, because they can't look down and write notes and look back at the board without their symptoms getting worse. They are not going to be able to sit in class. And at that point, our doctors might ask, can they get notes from the teacher or notes from another student, because they're not going to be able to take notes. It all just depends on the kid, but this is the form that we use. So we went, you know, this is the standard of practice. We will not deviate from it for return to play. So post-concussive syndrome. The World Health Organization defines it as a persistence of 3 of the following following a head injury: headache, dizziness, fatigue, insomnia, concentration difficulty, or memory difficulty. Our doctors don't typically diagnose the kids with this until they're at that 6-week point. Once they're over 6 weeks is when they start considering this and considering specialists beyond them. Because these are the kids that are going to need specialized therapy, more prolonged accommodation from school, possibly a 504, because they're just not going to be able to sit in class and do the work. Okay, rule changes. And the green's not showing up very well. If you've noticed in the past probably 18 months, a lot of sports have changed the rules. There's a 7-day DL for baseball for concussions. So any of the guys that get a concussion in baseball, they can go on a 7-day DL. That way they're not automatically put on the longer DL. The NFL, the NHL, NBA, everyone is changing their rules. Just this week on Tuesday, the Cheer Association and the National Federation of High Schools outlawed double downs. They cannot do a double down in cheerleading anymore. It's gone. Not allowed. They found that was very predictive in giving the girls sustaining the concussions. Either the flyers or the girls catching them because they, arms are flying. So they can't do the double downs anymore. High School League changed the rule last year. They have to be cleared by a physician, an MD or a DO after diagnosis of a concussion. We don't clear. They have to see a doctor. And helmets are good for skull fractures. They're not good for concussions. You can, in general, we at Spring Valley, me and the other athletic trainer, the coaches hand out the helmets. They have to come to us and be cleared on fit. We check the fit of their helmet to make sure it fits them properly. Because the type of helmet doesn't matter so much as fit. You can have the best helmet in the world, and the 5-star helmet, the Rydell Speed, that's from the Virginia Tech study, it's the best helmet they say there is. If it doesn't fit right, it's not going to work.
I'm going to mention this, Julie. We're talking about helmets. There was a study, I believe it came out of Penn. Was it the one out of Penn? 5 concussive events in 20 months. The last one he had, he was at a water fountain. It was an alcoved water fountain. So he's sitting at the water fountain, his coach called him, and he stepped and went right into the wall. And I mean, literally, he was rushing. He stepped and went right into the wall. He knocked himself cold.
We had that happen.
The other 4, yeah, he was a baseball kid. He wasn't a football kid, but he had 4 concussive events on a baseball field prior to that. That was the one that did him in. Was the one where he took that, this is kind of a violent step, but literally he stepped and just went into it and caught his head, and that's the one that did him in. So it doesn't have to be like Brennen's, the big one. It can be a series of small ones. Another thing to remember about concussions is they're cumulative. Is that once a kid has one, his threshold for getting the second, the third, the fourth, every time he gets one, we're finding out the threshold drops. It comes down significantly. And some of the ones that happen late elementary school, middle school age, we're finding out through histories that some of these kids have 3 and 4 when they're in middle school. Sometimes they get reported, sometimes they don't. And these are the kids that end up when they becoming freshmen in high school, sophomores, whatever. These are the ones the athletic trainers start having problems with kids with repetitive problems because their threshold is dropped. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is that, you got popped with a door, going through a door. That may be the one that finished it off right there.
Well, that goes back to the